My husband threw me out after he won $500 million in the lottery. You're not getting a single cent of my money, you fat freeloader, he screamed with pure malice. But the fool never looked at the name on the back of the ticket. A week later, he would learn that the person you sleep next to can break more than just your heart. They can also rip out your soul. Without ever raising her voice, Carmen Rodriguez was 38 years old, her face a portrait of a woman who had learned to be silent, not out of cowardice, but for survival. Her eyes, though weary, still held the glint of someone who had not yet surrendered to being invisible. For 5 years, she had worked as a custodian at LA County General Hospital, early morning shifts, double duty, and an ache in her feet that had become a constant companion. Her simple uniform was always immaculate. Despite a salary that barely covered the rent, let alone new socks, she lived in an old tract housing development in the San Fernando Valley. The houses were packed together, with faded stucco walls and neighbors who knew too much but always kept their mouths shut. Carmen shared the house with her husband, Leo, and their 2 children, Nico, 11, and Valerie, 7. Both kids attended the local public school. Leo, meanwhile, spent his days watching television or locked in their bedroom, smoking cigarettes and blaming the world for his fate. The last time he held a steady job was almost a year ago. According to him, the bosses were idiots and his co-workers were traitors. Since then, his temper had soured. Their fights became frequent, shouting matches, slammed doors, long, suffocating silences, and barbed comments that, while leaving no physical marks, began to poison everything around them. Carmen had stopped telling him her problems. She no longer shared her joys, and especially not her hopes. Until that one Friday, exhausted after a 12-hour shift scrubbing hospital floors, she stopped in front of a 7-Eleven. A fluorescent yellow Powerball sign announced the week's jackpot, $500 million. She looked in her wallet. All that was left was a single $20 bill. She hesitated, but something inside her, perhaps the desperate longing for a different life, pushed her to reach out and buy a single ticket. That night, as Leo snored with the TV still on and an empty beer bottle on the bedside table, Carmen placed the ticket on her dresser. She looked at it one last time before going to sleep. Then, she hugged herself and closed her eyes. She barely mentioned it to Leo. She just said, "Leo, I played the lottery. You never know." Leo didn't even grunt. He waved his hand as if shooing away a fly. The days passed. Carmen continued her routine. Work, home, helping the kids with homework, avoiding Leo's dark moods. One afternoon, returning from the hospital, she noticed something was different. Not his expression, but the silence. A tense, sharp silence that precedes a storm. Leo was sitting at the dining room table, motionless. He was holding the lottery ticket. The television was blaring a news report. The winning Powerball numbers were 9, 13, 18, 34, 41, and the Powerball, 6. And those exact numbers were perfectly printed on the ticket he held between his fingers. Carmen felt her knees tremble slightly. She approached, trying to understand. "That's mine," she said, without raising her voice. Leo didn't answer. He just looked at her. A dark look, like that of a stranger. She repeated, "I bought that ticket with my last $20. What followed was an explosion of rage that had been accumulating for years. Leo shot up in an instant, kicking his chair to the floor and screaming with a fury that sent Valerie, who was playing in her room, running out in fear. "You? You think this money is yours? You're not getting a single cent, you fat freeloader. You should be grateful I put up with you all these years." Carmen froze. She felt the blood drain from her face. Nico appeared behind her, his eyes wide. "Dad, why are you yelling at Mom?" But Leo didn't stop. "This is my house. My rules. You and your bratty kids aren't going to ruin my life now." Carmen stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. She grabbed the back of a chair for support. "Leo, my name is on that ticket. I bought it." "There's no name on it," he yelled, waving the paper in the air. "And if there was, I'd tear it up in your face. Get out! Get out of my house! Now!" The children started to cry. Nico hugged his sister, trying to cover her ears. Carmen couldn't understand. She didn't want to understand. This was her house, her children, her family. But in that moment, she realized she had nothing. Leo went to their room, threw open the closet, and tossed her few belongings onto the floor. A worn-out suitcase, a pair of shoes, 3 old blouses. He dragged them to the front door. Carmen, her dignity hanging by a thread, bent down to pick them up while the neighbors began to peek through their windows. "What are you doing, Leo?" "The kids can see you," a neighbor shouted from her second-story window. "Mind your own business, Mrs. Gable," he shot back angrily. Did this woman really think she could steal from me? Carmen walked out with the suitcase. Nico ran to her. "Mom, don't go. Don't leave us." "I will never leave you, my love. Never. I just need to think." She walked with no destination. The streets seemed darker than usual. The city continued its rhythm, indifferent. No one stopped to look at a woman with empty eyes and a broken suitcase. She ended up on a bench in Pershing Square. The night chill seeped into her bones. She hugged her knees and took a deep breath, like someone trying not to shatter from within. Near midnight, her cell phone vibrated. A text from Nico. "Mom, I love you. Everything will be okay. I promise." Carmen broke down sobbing, with no strength left to hold back the tide of her emotions. Meanwhile, Leo was celebrating at home with a group of friends who barely remembered his last name. He drank as if the money had always been his. He posted an Instagram story holding the ticket, never considering that on the back, a small line written in pencil read, "Carmen Rodriguez, 08-17. The ticket was still intact, tucked between the pages of a Bible Carmen used as her safe box. Leo had found it while looking for something to sell. He hadn't bothered to look at the details. He never thought she could claim anything because, in his mind, she had no right even to her own name. In the park, a woman in her 60s approached Carmen with a cup of hot coffee. "Are you okay, honey?" "No, but I will be." "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not yet. Maybe tomorrow." Carmen drank the coffee. It tasted like childhood, like what used to be. And in that moment, as the city slept and her world seemed to crumble, she understood that something inside her had awakened. It wasn't anger, it wasn't even revenge, it was dignity. And though she slept that night on a bench, with damp shoes and a shattered soul, for the first time in a long time, she dreamed. She dreamed she was getting up. She dreamed she was coming back for her children. And that ticket, which seemed to have left her with nothing, would be the beginning of everything she deserved. The dawn brought not hope, but a damp chill, a sore back, and a metallic taste in her mouth that wasn't hunger but old sorrow. Carmen woke up sitting on the park bench, hugging her own loneliness, her face wet with morning dew. The kind woman who had offered her coffee was gone. There were only a few homeless people sleeping on cardboard and the echo of her own thoughts hitting her chest again and again. She stood up and walked aimlessly through the empty streets, wrapped in a jacket that wasn't warm enough, pulling the suitcase that felt heavier with each step. She decided to go to her mother's house. She knocked on the door with numb fingers. She waited. She heard slow footsteps behind the door and finally, the sound of a lock turning. Her mother, Louisa, a woman with a hard gaze aged by years, appeared. She didn't say good morning. She looked her up and down and crossed her arms. "What happened now?" she asked, without surprise. "I need to stay for a few days. Leo threw me out." Louisa sighed as if she'd heard that story 1,000 times. "And now you find out who he really is. I told you, Carmen. I warned you when you first met him. That man never loved you." "I know. I'm not here for a lecture. Just for a roof over my head. Mom, that's all." Louisa hesitated, looking at her as if she were an old, bothersome stone. Finally, she opened the door. Carmen walked in. The air smelled of burnt onions and disappointment. She went straight to the sofa and collapsed. Louisa sat in a chair, crossed her legs, and lit a cigarette. "Where are the children?" "With him. He wouldn't let me take them." "And you just left without a fight?" Carmen looked at her with empty, tearless eyes. "I have no strength left, Mom. I feel like I'm already dead." "And what are you going to do now?" "I don't know." Louisa slowly blew out the smoke. "Well, you better figure it out soon, because you're not staying here forever." Carmen's stomach clenched instantly. Even from her own blood, she found no comfort. The roof she had asked for as a refuge came with a price she couldn't afford, contempt disguised as help. Sleeping there was like begging for dignity. She endured 2 nights. On the third, she decided to leave. From a computer at the public library, she searched for a shelter for women who were victims of violence. She found one 6 blocks from the hospital. She knocked on the door with trepidation. A woman in her 40s, with dark skin, deep eyes, and a firm expression, greeted her. "Are you Carmen?" "Yes. I was told you help people here." "I'm Maria. Come in." The place was an old house, renovated with love. Posters of female solidarity on the walls, pictures of smiling women, a kitchen that smelled of warm soup, children running around, tears shared in silence. Carmen felt, for the first time in days, that she could breathe. Maria led her into her office. She took out a notebook and began to write. Full name, Carmen Rodriguez. Age, 38. Type of violence, physical, emotional, financial. Carmen hesitated. Emotional and financial. He threw me out in front of my children. Maria nodded. Do you have any proof? No. Just my word. And a lottery ticket that I bought. And he took. Maria looked up. A lottery ticket? Yes. I bought a ticket a week ago with my last $20. I left it at home. It won $500 million, and he took it. He threw me out, insulted me. He said I had no right to anything. Maria was silent for a few seconds. Then she slowly took off her glasses and looked at her with more than just attention. She looked at her with humanity. Do you know what that means? What? That you didn't just suffer emotional abuse, but also theft. If that ticket has your name on it, that money is legally yours. Carmen felt a jolt run through her skin. She hadn't even considered it a possibility. In her mind, everything was lost. But Maria was talking about laws, paperwork, justice. What if no one believes me? What if he says he bought it? You said you bought it with your last $20. Do you have any proof? I paid in cash. It was just a small receipt from a 7-Eleven. Maria studied her closely. Carmen, I'm going to ask you something difficult. Do you want justice or revenge? Carmen didn't answer immediately. She took a crumpled photo from her pocket. Her children, and Leo at the park. An old photo from happier times that no longer existed. I want him to look me in the eyes and realize he has nothing. That's what I want. Maria closed her notebook. That's called emotional justice, and I'm going to help you get it. Meanwhile, in the house that was once Carmen's, Leo was drinking with strangers, young women, sudden friends, smoke, loud music, champagne bottles, and empty promises. He hired a photographer to set up a neighborhood's new millionaire photo shoot. He posted on social media with lines like, "Life is a wheel of fortune," or, "From nothing, now a millionaire." His ego was floating above everything. He received messages from women who had never spoken to him before. He was invited to dinners. He was praised. He bought a sports car even though he didn't know how to drive. He hired a chauffeur. He wore fake watches and borrowed gold chains. He became a viral personality, but then the calls started. First, anonymous. Then, persistent. At first, he thought they were jokes. Then they started leaving messages that unsettled him. We know that ticket isn't yours. Enjoy it while you can. Money doesn't wash away who you are. The truth always comes out. Leo started changing the locks. He had cameras installed. He became paranoid. He couldn't sleep. He suspected everyone, even his own brother, Damien, whom he had entrusted with managing part of the money. Damien, with a serpent's smile, began to divert funds without Leo noticing. But Leo didn't know that yet. Carmen, at the shelter, spent her evenings with other women. Harsher stories, similar pains. One of them had a scar on her forehead. Another hadn't spoken in weeks. Maria organized talks, workshops, safe spaces. Little by little, Carmen began to find herself again. She learned about rights, about legal processes. She learned that if she could prove she bought the ticket, she could claim the entire prize. She then remembered that, out of habit, she had written her name on the back of the ticket with a pencil, a detail that could change everything. Maria smiled when she told her, that written name could be the key. Are you ready to fight? Yes. Then let's do this right. No scandal, no emotions. With intelligence, Carmen wrote a letter to her children. She couldn't see them yet. Leo wouldn't allow it. but she wanted them to know she hadn't abandoned them. Maria managed to get it delivered through a neighbor, a woman who had also suffered violence in the past and had now become a silent ally. Valerie cried when she read it. Nico hid it under his pillow. Carmen also began to build her new identity, not just legally, but internally. She was no longer the scorned wife. She was the woman who had decided to rise from the ashes. She started writing in a notebook, talking to other women, healing. One night, Maria entered the dining room and turned on the television. Leo was on the news. The new tycoon, the man whose fortune had changed, the now cryptocurrency entrepreneur. Carmen watched him in silence. "What do you feel when you see him like that?" Maria asked. "It feels like a movie. But this time, I don't want to be the victim. I want to be the one writing the script." Maria handed her an envelope. "This is for you. It's the copy of the complaint we're going to file, but there's something else." Carmen looked at her attentively. "What is it?" "A journalist has become interested in your case. She wants to tell your story, anonymously, as part of a campaign about financial abuse. Are you willing?" Carmen hesitated, then nodded. "So the world knows. Because what he did to me, he has done to many others." That night, Carmen dreamed again. But she was no longer dreaming of getting up. She was already standing. She dreamed she was running, that her children were waiting for her in a new house, that life, though cruel, could still be just. And on the other side of the city, Leo woke up in a cold sweat after a nightmare where he lost everything in front of a laughing crowd. The fight was just beginning, and he didn't even know it. Leo woke up drenched in sweat, the sheets clinging to his skin and a persistent buzzing in his ears. He had dreamed he was standing in the middle of a public square, naked, and the lottery ticket was melting in his hands. All around him, a crowd was laughing, pointing, and calling him a thief. He shot up in bed, didn't check the time, and went to the bathroom. The mirror reflected a tired image, dark circles under his eyes, new wrinkles, and a disheveled look that no haircut or expensive cologne could hide. He splashed cold water on his face and went back to bed. A young woman covered in tattoos up to her neck was sleeping beside him. He couldn't even remember her name. He had met so many in recent weeks that he had lost count. Women came and went like the smoke from the cigarettes he now smoked incessantly. The money had turned him into a caricature of himself. He had cars, flashy watches, a new house in a private gated community, though he hadn't finished paying for it. He signed contracts without reading them, recommended by people he barely knew, neighborhood figures who had suddenly appeared with toothy grins and promises to grow his wealth. He believed them. They called him an entrepreneur, an investor, and he would smile like a child with a new toy. Everyone wanted to be close to the new millionaire, though no one truly respected him. His brother, Damien, was one of the first to arrive. He visited him as soon as he heard about the prize, telling him how happy he was for him, that they were blood, that he always knew Leo was destined for great things. Leo, thirsty for recognition, believed him without question. He put him in charge of managing a portion of the money, signed powers of attorney, opened foreign accounts in his name. Damien presented himself as a financial expert. In reality, he was a ruthless opportunist. While Leo played the celebrity, Damien was slowly siphoning the funds. Small transfers, fake investments, ghost accounts. During one of those afternoons of supposed financial advice, Leo told Damien, "I'm thinking of buying a yacht, or maybe opening a club, something big, so people see I'm not who I used to be." Damien looked at him with that enigmatic smile that was part of his disguise. "Of course, brother, whatever you want. But first, let's secure your money. We don't want you to end up like those lottery winners who are worse off than before within 2 years." Leo laughed, unconcerned. "That won't happen to me." Damien just nodded, mentally counting the money that would soon be his. Meanwhile, Nico and Valerie were living in a limbo between neglect and resentment. Leo had moved them to the new apartment, a high-rise with a gym and a pool, but he ignored them. He promised to take them to Disneyland but never bought the tickets. He promised them the best toys, the best clothes, but only used them to post photos showing what a great, successful single father he was. One evening, Nico stared at him from the sofa. He was only 11, but he had the eyes of a weary old man. "Dad, Why isn't Mom here if she's the one who bought the ticket? Leo tensed. The glass in his hand trembled slightly. He turned with a smile that wasn't a smile. Don't you ever say that again. She was worthless. She left. She didn't want this life. She didn't want to fight alongside me. That's not true. I said, Don't you ever say that again. Valerie started to cry silently. Nico hugged her, and Leo locked himself in his room. He couldn't stand anyone questioning his version of events. He had convinced himself that he had won the money by fate, because he deserved it, that Carmen was a burden, an anchor he had finally cut loose. On another side of the city, Carmen held a piece of paper. It was the acceptance letter to begin the legal process. Maria looked at her with contained pride. Now you take the first step. Not towards revenge, but towards the truth. Carmen nodded. She no longer trembled. She no longer stammered. Something had changed in her gaze. She was the same woman, but with a different fire in her eyes. Meanwhile, Maria had contacted a journalist named Lara, who specialized in women's rights. Lara, herself a survivor of financial abuse, had become obsessed with Carmen's case from the moment she heard it. It wasn't just a powerful story. It was a reflection of thousands of invisible women, dispossessed without a trace. Lara asked to interview her. Carmen agreed, on the condition that her face and name not be revealed. The documentary began filming at the shelter, with testimonies from other women. It was also a time bomb, a mirror for society. Lara titled it Stolen Futures, When Abuse Has No Bruises. Carmen's story was the central thread. Meanwhile, Leo started noticing that something was wrong. Calls from unknown numbers, messages with disturbing phrases. One night, he found a piece of paper slipped under his apartment door with a single word handwritten on it: thief. Not just thief, but scrawled with emphasis, to hurt more, as if it came from someone who didn't even bother to write neatly to insult him. It was pure contempt. He stormed into the apartment, checking everything, shouting, slamming the table. Nico watched him from the hallway. "What's wrong, Dad?" "Nothing. Go to sleep." But Leo couldn't sleep. Not that night, or the next. His paranoia grew. He had alarms installed. He asked Damien to investigate if someone was trying to sabotage him. Damien told him not to worry. But the next day, his main bank account showed strange transactions. He called the bank. He didn't understand what they were telling him. Money transferred to an international account in the name of a company he didn't recognize. He called Damien. There was no answer. Carmen, on the other hand, was receiving messages of support from other women who had seen the teaser for the documentary. Women from poor communities, from offices, from rural areas. They told her they felt represented, that it gave them strength. Carmen began to feel that her story was no longer just hers. It was part of something bigger. The lawyer Maria had recommended confirmed that if they could prove Carmen bought the ticket, not only could Leo lose the money, but he could also face charges of unjust enrichment. Everything depended on one piece of evidence: the name written on the back. Maria picked up the phone. She called the official from the State Lottery Commission who had overseen the ticket verification when it was claimed. "Do you remember if there was anything written on the ticket?" "I didn't check it thoroughly, just the numbers on the front. But if there was, it should be in the archived file. I'll have to verify." The official hung up. 2 days later, he called back. "Yes, the ticket was scanned on both sides. There's a name written in pencil, almost faded. It says Carmen Rodriguez, and a date." Maria smiled as if she had just found a crack in a concrete wall. Carmen covered her mouth. She cried silently. It was real. She had proof, the most important proof. Leo, on the other hand, received a letter that week. A plain white envelope. No return address. Inside, a court notice. A lawsuit for illegal appropriation of property. Carmen's name was written in large letters on the document. The rest was a blur to his eyes. He stood motionless, breathless. He locked himself in the bathroom, looked in the mirror. The same mirror where, a few months ago, he had felt invincible. That face now looked like a defeated man, even before the fight had begun. He called Damien's number. It rang twice. Then an automated recording answered. "The number you have dialed does not exist." He called the bank. They informed him that Damien had withdrawn all the money from the secondary account 3 days ago. Leo felt his legs go weak. He leaned against the sink, then he screamed with a force that shook the walls. Nico and Valerie were terrified. Valerie ran to her room. Nico looked at him from the bathroom doorway. "What's happening, Dad?" Leo turned, his eyes red. "Nothing. Nothing. Everything's fine." Nico looked at him for another second. Then he said, "Mom never screams like that," and left. That night, Leo didn't sleep. Nor the next day. He reviewed every contract. He called everyone. No one answered him. The so-called investors were gone. The girl with the tattoos was gone. His parties were over. The friends had vanished. The taunting messages were returning. Carmen was preparing her testimony. The lawyer explained every step to her. They weren't just seeking to recover the money. They wanted to set a legal precedent. It was a fight that could change many lives. The documentary was scheduled to be released a week later, just after the first hearing. The mask of success was beginning to crack. Leo could no longer sustain the lie, and he had no idea what was coming next. Justice doesn't always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it comes silently, in the form of a piece of paper with the name of a woman who was cast out, humiliated, and was now returning not to beg, but to reclaim what had always been hers. And the first blow was about to land. Carmen wasn't just coming back, she was coming back with a truth that was impossible to erase. The court notice exploded in Leo's hands like a silent bomb. The envelope was white, unassuming, but inside it held a threat that all his fake power could not control. His hands shook as he read his full name printed in black ink. Leo Albert Martinez, sued for unjust enrichment, financial and emotional abuse. At the bottom, the plaintiff was not some anonymous law firm. It was the name of a woman he had erased from his life, like a piece of dirt. Carmen Rodriguez. He screamed. He threw the envelope against the wall. He paced back and forth like a caged animal. He called the lawyer who had helped him close some shady contracts when he first started moving money undeclared. But this time, the voice on the other end was dry, distant. "This is a different league, Leo. I don't handle cases involving domestic abuse, especially when there's legal evidence. I'm paying you. Fix this." "Not anymore. I'm sorry. You're on your own." He hung up. Leo threw his phone to the floor, and it shattered into 3 pieces. Then he looked at his open, empty hands. He felt everything slipping away, that every decision he had made since touching that cursed ticket was bringing him closer to the abyss. On the other side of the city, Carmen held her sworn statement. It was a simple piece of paper, but every word written on it was a healing wound. Maria was with her, silent, as she always was when silence was more important than any speech. Outside, in the courthouse waiting area, a crowd of journalists awaited the start of a hearing that was already trending on social media. The documentary about Carmen had gone viral. It was shared in women's groups, universities, alternative media outlets. Thousands commented, cried, were outraged. Some even called her a symbol of resistance. But Carmen didn't want to be a symbol of anything. She just wanted justice and her children. She entered the courtroom with a steady step. The judge, a man with a neutral expression and thick glasses, looked at her intently. Leo arrived 10 minutes late, with a wrinkled suit and a swollen face, accompanied by a new, young, nervous lawyer he had hired that morning, with the little that was left of his fortune. Leo didn't greet Carmen or anyone. His gaze was a dark well. The judge called for order. "We will begin the preliminary hearing in the case of Rodriguez versus Martinez. Both parties are present. Let's begin." Carmen stood up. The judge asked her to speak. She took a deep breath and, without raising her voice, began. "My name is Carmen Rodriguez. I am a mother, a woman, and a survivor. For many years, I lived beside a man who made me believe I was worthless, that everything I did was insignificant, that my job wasn't a real job, that my decisions didn't matter. When I bought that lottery ticket, I did it dreaming of giving my children a better life. I never imagined it would be the reason he would try to destroy me. I don't want his money. I'm not interested. I want my children back. I want him to face justice for everything he took from me in silence, because financial abuse is also violence. Because there are many women like me who are dispossessed every day, and no one hears them." She paused. She looked at Leo, who couldn't meet her gaze. He just shifted uncomfortably. Carmen took a breath and finished her statement with a sentence that silenced everyone in the room. I never wanted his money. I just want my children to know that their mother was not a freeloader, but a strong woman who chose to get back up. There was complete silence. The judge nodded and turned his gaze to Leo. Mr. Martinez, you may speak. Leo stood up, his voice strained. That's a lie. She's using this to destroy me. I won that money. She doesn't even know how the lottery works. I claimed the ticket. I did it legally. Do you have any proof that you purchased it? No. But neither does she. Carmen's lawyer stood up, with the court's permission. She does, Your Honor. We will present the scanned images of the original ticket archived at the State Lottery Commission office, where the name Carmen Rodriguez is clearly legible, written on the back, with a date prior to the draw. The judge took the documents. He examined them carefully, passed them to his clerk, and then looked at Leo. Do you have anything to say to that? It could be fake. She could have written that after. It's a trap. The judge cut him off. It was scanned by the official agency. Before it was claimed, this is confirmed by the original file. Mr. Martinez, you are in a very serious situation. I recommend you be careful with your words. Leo sat down abruptly. He was pale. For the first time, his defense had crumbled. He had no arguments left, only rage. The hearing continued with testimonies. Maria testified about Carmen's state when she arrived at the shelter. Then, 2 neighbors spoke. One recounted how she had witnessed the humiliation of Leo kicking her out with insults. The other narrated how, for years, Carmen had supported the family while Leo worked on non-existent projects, but the unexpected came at the end. The judge called a final witness. Her name was not in the initial documents. Carmen's defense had proposed her that morning. When she entered the room, Leo stood up as if he had seen a ghost. It was Michaela, one of his lovers. The same woman who posted photos with him on social media, the one he called the true queen of his life. Carmen looked at her with a mixture of shock and sadness. Michaela approached the witness stand. She looked different. No makeup, simple clothes, sad eyes. The judge asked her to speak. I knew Mr. Martinez for 5 months. We started a relationship. I didn't know he had children with him, much less that he had thrown his wife out. I only found out through social media. At first, he denied it, but when he started running out of money, his attitude changed. He became aggressive. One day, we had a fight over a text message I received. He pushed me against the wall. It left a bruise. I didn't file a complaint. I was scared. But when I saw the documentary about Carmen, I knew I had to be here. Leo jumped from his chair. Liar, that never happened. The judge banged his gavel. Order in the court, Michaela continued. I have saved messages, audio recordings, where he makes fun of Carmen, of his children, where he says that if he could make her disappear, he would. I have given them to the prosecutor. They are in your hands. The room erupted in murmurs, glances. The judge called for order. Leo was pale, trembling. His new lawyer bowed his head, knowing the case was lost. Carmen didn't smile. She didn't feel vengeful. She just felt sad for everyone, for the wasted time, for the children caught in the middle, for the damage that no one could ever erase. The hearing ended with a preliminary resolution. The judge recognized Carmen's name on the ticket as sufficient evidence to begin the process of recovering the money and suspended Leo's access to the related accounts. Furthermore, he granted Carmen temporary custody of the children until the full case was resolved. Leo could not approach her or have any contact. When Carmen left the courthouse, a small group of people was waiting for her. Ordinary people, women with signs. Some were crying, others were applauding. They weren't fans, they were survivors. A woman approached her. Thank you for not giving up, for speaking out. Carmen took her hand. I'm not speaking for myself. I'm speaking for all of us. That night, as she was getting ready for bed in her room at the shelter, she received a text from Nico. It just said, "Saw you on TV. Love you, Mom." Carmen placed the phone on her chest and closed her eyes. She had nothing, but she had what mattered most. The beginning of something new, a truth that no one could erase. And this time, silence would not silence her. The next morning brought a warm breeze, as if the air itself had decided to treat her with delicacy. She woke up before everyone else, walked barefoot down the shelter's hallway, and stopped in front of the small kitchen mirror. She was no longer the same woman who had arrived weeks ago. She was no longer afraid of her reflection. She no longer searched for flaws or hid from her own thoughts. Now, she looked for motives, for reasons, and above all, for a plan. The trial was held in a higher court. It was no longer a preliminary hearing. Now, justice had to render a final verdict. Leo arrived in a rented suit, with deep dark circles under his eyes and no entourage by his side. No one accompanied him. His new lawyer no longer had the same fervor. There was no possible defense. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimonies numerous, and his public image was destroyed. The documentary continued to circulate on social media, becoming a symbol of struggle. It had been shared by women's associations, lawyers, judges, and hundreds of people who had never heard Carmen's name but now recognized her on the street. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Carmen sat in the front row with Maria by her side. She wore a simple white blouse and held a folder in her hands. No jewelry, no makeup. She didn't need adornments to show who she was. Her presence was enough. The judge reviewed every detail. The ticket registered in her name, the scanned evidence, Leo's bank transactions, Michaela's testimony, the submitted audio recordings, the public insults, the neglect of his children. Everything was documented. The judge paused before reading the sentence, as if the air itself needed to prepare. Based on the evidence presented and the testimonies gathered, this court finds Mr. Leo Martinez guilty of unjust enrichment, fraudulent conduct, and financial and emotional abuse against Mrs. Carmen Rodriguez. He is sentenced to pay a substantial fine as compensation. All his bank accounts are frozen, and the immediate seizure of the property located in the private subdivision of Las Lomas is ordered. Furthermore, a restraining order is established, whereby the defendant may not come within 300 yards of Mrs. Rodriguez or her children for a minimum of 5 years. Leo said nothing, just bowed his head. The sound of the verdict fell like a gavel. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He didn't protest. He knew it was over. Deep down, he knew it had begun the day he threw Carmen onto the street like trash. That was the beginning of his end. Carmen left the court in silence. Several media outlets were waiting for her. She didn't speak for the cameras, only to a little girl who shyly approached her with a drawing. The paper showed a woman with a cape surrounded by hearts. Carmen accepted it with tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "Is this for me?" "Yes. My mom says you're very brave." Carmen bent down and hugged her. She didn't respond with words. She just closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel the moment. The news of the verdict spread throughout the country. In a matter of hours, Carmen's story was no longer just a case of abuse, but had become a social phenomenon. Invitations for interviews began to arrive, but Carmen didn't want cameras or sensationalist shows. She wanted something real, something that would last longer than a few seconds of fame. With the help of Maria and part of the money she recovered after the trial, she founded an organization called the Open Door Foundation, a space for women victims of financial and emotional abuse. The goal was clear: to offer shelter, legal guidance, psychological support, and above all, a real network that worked beyond nice speeches. She gave the first workshop herself, a small room with recycled chairs and cups of hot coffee. In front of her, 8 women listened in silence, all with different stories, all with the same look in their eyes. Carmen sat down and began to speak without notes, without a prepared discourse. "For a long time, I thought I wasn't enough, that if I stayed quiet, he would change, that if I was patient, if I was good, if I sacrificed, everything would be fixed. I was wrong. Sometimes, silence doesn't save. Sometimes silence kills. But I learned something important. We are not the scars that others leave on us. We are the hands that are now writing a new story. And that story begins with the decision to no longer live in fear." One of the women started to cry. Another clenched her fists. Carmen understood in that moment that she had found her place, not as a victim, not as a hero, but as a bridge. Leo, on the other hand, was living in a rented room behind a hardware store. No car, no friends, no money. Damien had disappeared. He had taken everything that was left in the accounts and hadn't even bothered to leave a note. Leo had tried to contact him several times, but the number was out of service. The messages went unanswered. No one in the family wanted to talk to him. He was left alone, and now, without masks, he faced himself and didn't like what he saw. He looked for a job. No one hired him. His face was all over the internet, linked to scandals. Even the women he used to be with blocked him. Michaela had gone public to tell her story. He was called abusive, a fraud. Insults rained down on him on social media. He lived in fear of going out, of being recognized, of himself. One night, drunk, he recorded a video on his phone. "People judge me. All of you. You don't know what it was like to live with her. I suffered too. I also had the right to be happy." But when he saw himself on the screen, he didn't recognize himself. Not even he believed his own words. He turned off the phone and cried for the first time without screaming, just quiet tears. Nico and Valerie were living with Carmen now. The reunion was private, full of contained emotions. Nico hugged her for 5 minutes without letting go. Valerie didn't stop talking, as if everything had been bottled up in her chest. Carmen listened to them, kissed them, made them hot chocolate, and promised them something she could fulfill. "We will never live in fear again." With part of the money, she rented a small but bright house. White walls, plants on the balcony, a kitchen that smelled like home. Nico had a bicycle. Valerie painted her own masterpieces. They didn't have luxury, but they had peace. And that was new. Maria continued to accompany her in everything. They had become sisters in cause, in path, in pain, and in struggle. There were projects, expansion plans, collaborations with other organizations. Carmen was no longer just a viral story. She was a woman in transformation. One night, while sweeping the patio, Nico approached her. "Mom, do you regret being with Dad?" Carmen stopped. She looked him in the eyes. "No. Because out of all that was bad, you two came. And you and your sister are the best thing that ever happened to me." Nico nodded. "I miss him, but I understand now. I don't want to go back to him." "You don't have to choose. He will always be your father, but you are the one who will choose what kind of man you want to be." "I want to be like you." Carmen hugged him. There were no words for a moment like that. Time began to pass. The foundation grew. The documentary won an award. Carmen was invited to speak at international forums, but she always returned home, to the small gestures, to the hugs, to the stories of real women who, like her, one day said enough. And Leo, in the shadows, was still there, watching from afar how the woman he tried to erase had built an empire with what he had scorned. Sometimes he saw her face on television, on social media, in the news, and he would bow his head. He no longer screamed, no longer complained. He just fell silent. The price of his arrogance wasn't just losing money. It was losing everything: respect, family, dignity. He was left with the echo of a life that was no longer his. And Carmen, finally, slept soundly. Not because the past had disappeared, but because for the first time she had faced it and won. The mornings in the new house weren't luxurious, but they had a harmony that had never existed before. The smell of toast mixed with Valerie's laughter, who often sang softly while setting the table. Nico watered the plants in the small garden he had helped plant with his own hands. It was a simple house with bright walls and large windows, but every corner spoke of rebirth, of love replanted after disaster. Carmen walked barefoot on the wooden floor, coffee cup in hand, hair down, and head held high. She had bought that house with part of the recovered money, but what made it valuable wasn't the money, but everything it had taken to get there. Every tile laid, every piece of furniture chosen, symbolized freedom. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise, and the world kept turning. But now, for the first time in a long time, it turned without crushing her. The Open Door Foundation had grown beyond her wildest dreams. What began as a support network for women now had branches in 3 more cities. There were workshops on legal advice, art therapy, and self-care sessions. Carmen had managed to assemble a team of professionals who worked with dedication, not for a salary, men and women who had experienced firsthand what it meant to be on the other side of society's indifference. Maria had become her official partner. Together, they organized a national event called Voices Unsilenced. Thousands of women registered. It was a call to action unlike any other, and the media covered it as an emotional revolution. In the midst of the preparations, Carmen paused for a moment and observed the magnitude of what they were creating. Backstage, surrounded by technicians, lights, and banners with words of resistance, Maria approached her with a sincere smile. "Do you realize what you've done?" Carmen looked down, almost shyly. "I didn't do it alone, but no one did it for you." On stage, the team was finalizing the last details. Carmen took a deep breath. It was the first time she would speak in front of so many people, not as a victim, but as someone who had turned her pain into strength. Meanwhile, in a weekly rental room in a dilapidated building, Leo tried to do a live stream from his old cell phone. The screen was dirty, the microphone faulty, and his voice sounded hollow, like an actor repeating lines without conviction. "Hello, friends. I'm here to tell my truth. Many have judged me, but no one knows what really happened." He closed his eyes, and when he looked at the number of viewers on the stream, he saw a 0. No one was listening to him. No one was looking for him. The few who still remembered his name did so with shame. He had become a social media joke, a symbol of defeated arrogance. There were even memes with his face, and mocking phrases like, "When your ego can't pay the rent." The same people who had once praised him now laughed at his downfall. Damien had never reappeared. He had vanished with the last of the money from the accounts. The contracts Leo had signed without reading now tied him to debts he didn't understand. He had lost everything, but the most painful part was knowing that no one missed him. Once a month, he wrote messages to Nico and Valerie. They never replied. Carmen didn't forbid them, but the children no longer wanted contact. Nico, when he saw the messages, simply deleted them. Valerie didn't even read them. For them, the father who had rejected them no longer existed. The Voices Unsilenced event was bigger than they had imagined. The auditorium was filled with over 3,000 women. Carmen took the stage to a standing ovation. She had no written speech. She spoke from the soul. "We were taught to be quiet, to endure, to give them the benefit of the doubt. We were told that violence only matters if there's blood, but blood isn't always visible. Sometimes you bleed out on the inside, and no one notices. I lived for many years in silence, thinking that love was sacrifice, that it was normal to be broken, that fear was part of being a woman, until I found myself on a park bench with a broken suitcase and shattered dignity. And that day, I decided that no one else would tell my story for me. That day, I started to write it myself. There was absolute silence. Some cried, others held hands. Then, the auditorium erupted in applause. There were shouts of support. Names Carmen didn't know, but they embraced her with their gazes. After the event, a publishing house contacted her to turn her story into a book. Carmen hesitated, not out of modesty, but out of respect. She knew it wasn't just her story, it was the story of many. She agreed on the condition that real testimonies from other women be included. The book was titled Things We Hid in the Name of Love. It was an unexpected success. Social media dubbed her the woman who defeated a millionaire's ego. Carmen didn't like the title. She felt it reduced everything to a simple feud with Leo. But she understood that for many, her story represented a battle won on behalf of all those who could not tell theirs. The book was translated into 3 languages. Excerpts were read in universities. It became a topic of debate. But Carmen continued to go to the community center every morning, making coffee, listening to stories, caressing silences. One evening, while arranging some books in the Foundation's library, Nico entered the room. His voice was that of a teenager now. The change was evident, but that deep gaze, so similar to his mother's, remained. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy?" Carmen was taken aback. She thought about everything that had happened. The sleepless nights, the insults, the trial, the women she had hugged, her children growing up without fear. She didn't answer right away. "I'm not happy. I'm at peace. And that's better than happiness, because peace, no one can take that from you." Nico smiled. He said nothing more. He approached her and gave her a long, tight hug. Meanwhile, in his room, Leo was watching an excerpt from the event online. He had come across it by chance. His hand trembled as he saw Carmen on stage, radiant, applauded. On his face, there was no longer anger, only emptiness. He turned off his phone and remained silent. He remembered the times he had told her she was useless, that no one would ever listen to her, that she was alone. And now, the one who was alone was him. Life hadn't taken everything from him as punishment. It had taken it to show him that you can't build a house on a foundation of contempt. Carmen, on the other hand, went home that night. She prepared Valerie's favorite dessert. She helped Nico with a school project. Then she sat on the porch with a blanket over her legs and a cup of tea. The moon was full. The breeze was gentle. And for the first time in years, she felt no fear, no anxiety, no guilt, only gratitude. Because in the end, when life takes everything from you, it also gives you the chance to rebuild from the truth. And that truth, however painful, always sets you free. Carmen woke before dawn, as she had for months now, not out of anxiety or habit, but out of desire. She loved that moment of the day when the world had not yet awakened from its own noise. She put on her robe, prepared her coffee, and went out to the porch in silence. The fresh morning air gently caressed her face, as if life, in a quiet gesture, were reminding her that it was still there, that it was now hers. She was 41 years old. Her face had changed, not because of wrinkles, but because of serenity. She no longer had to defend herself from everything. She no longer carried the need to prove anything to anyone. She had discovered that true success is not recognition but calm, not revenge but dignity. That day, without planning it, she opened a new notebook. On the first page she wrote, "A letter to who I once was, and to those who will come after me." And she began to write without filters, as if her soul were dictating, not to be published, not to give speeches, but to leave something that perhaps someone would read when they needed it most. My dear you, yes you, the one who stays quiet, who endures, the one who smiles so as not to bother, the one who says it's not that bad while feeling your soul shatter. I was you too, the one who justified the shouts, the one who blamed herself for everything, the one who believed that love was losing oneself. I speak to you. You are not alone. You are not crazy. You are not overreacting. You are trapped in a lie we were taught since childhood, that being a good woman is enduring. No, enduring is not love. Being silent is not peace. Giving everything is not balance. I learned that no one has the right to walk over you, not with sweet words or with sharp ones. I learned that money, fear, what others will say, are not chains. They are excuses that society has put in place to keep us still, but the soul was not born to be caged. The soul, when it screams, is not asking for noise. It is asking for freedom. If you are reading this and something is stirring in your chest, listen to it, because that tremor is your sign. You are not alone. I was also thrown out onto the street. I was called a freeloader. I doubted myself. And I am here, not because I am strong, but because one day I decided to stop lying to myself. Do not seek revenge. Seek your truth. Do not dream of crushing the other. Dream of lifting yourself up, because those who walk alone often go the furthest. She signed the letter and put it away. She thought about publishing it. Not yet. Important things need time to rest. At noon, Nico suggested they eat at the beach. He loved the sea. He had always felt it was his refuge, even before he knew why. They prepared sandwiches, orange juice, and a blanket. Valerie brought her paints. The hours passed without clocks, without obligations. Just the three of them, the sound of the waves, and the open sky. "Mom," Valerie asked, a paint smudge on her face, "do you think all this had to happen?" Carmen looked at her without answering immediately. Then she nodded slowly. "Yes, I believe so. Because if it hadn't, we would have remained a lie." Valerie didn't fully understand, but she smiled anyway. Nico understood perfectly. Carmen watched the sea and thought about how she had gone from being invisible to being a symbol, from being silenced to being a voice. She hadn't planned any of it. She had only been true to herself. Maria called her that afternoon. She had been nominated for an international award for her work in human rights. They wanted Carmen to accompany her to Brussels to receive it together. She didn't hesitate. She accepted, not out of vanity, but because she understood that she was no longer alone in this. What they had created was not hers. It belonged to everyone. While Carmen lived a present full of purpose, Leo lived among ruins. His room remained the same. The rent was always late. He ate what he could, sometimes what he could find. He tried to work as a delivery driver on a borrowed motorcycle, but no one trusted him. His face provoked rejection. That night, he opened his old laptop. On the screen, YouTube recommended the documentary that had destroyed him. He hesitated. His first instinct was to close the tab, but something inside him asked him to watch, to listen. He pressed play. The video began with Carmen's voice, gentle, without resentment. When they tell you you're worthless, you often end up believing it. The hardest part wasn't him throwing me out, it was that I no longer knew how to defend myself. Leo felt a lump in his throat. He fast-forwarded a few minutes. Images of the old house, of the children, of the door closing in her face appeared. He looked at his own hands. He had loved those hands, but he had also used them to push, to close, to isolate. When the video ended, he didn't cry with anger or shame. He cried a new kind of cry, deep and silent. For the first time, he understood what he had done. For the first time, he didn't justify himself. He wrote a message. Carmen, I know I don't deserve for you to read this, but I watched the video, and now I understand many things. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just thank you for leaving, because if you hadn't, I would have remained a monster. Take care of them, and take care of yourself. I will make sure never to hurt them again. Carmen read the message that night. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. What she needed, she already had. And it was there, in her clean bed, in the notebook on her desk, in Valerie's drawings, in Nico's laughter, in the voices of hundreds of women who arrived at the foundation with lifeless eyes and left with their heads held high. The next morning, Carmen walked alone on the beach. The sea was calm. She sat on the sand and took out a new notebook. She wrote a single sentence. The story is over. Then she crossed it out. The story is just beginning. She looked at the horizon and closed her eyes. She finally understood. Life is not fair. But sometimes, just sometimes, life gives you back what your soul truly deserves. And she smiled. Because sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find yourself. Because those who walk alone often go the furthest. What can you say about this story? Many people like Carmen Rodriguez go through silent battles every day. Our hope is that her voice also resonates within you. If this story has touched your heart, share it. Let more people feel that they are not alone. Be part of the change. Tell us in the comments what you would have done in her situation. From what city are you watching? Reading you brings us closer. And if you haven't already, like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Every action you take is a sign that these stories must continue to be told. Don't go just yet. Our next moving story is appearing on your screen. Click on either one and continue exploring the universe of real, touching, and necessary stories. Thank you for being here. Thank you for feeling with us. We send you a big hug, wherever you are. See you in the next story.